I'm seriously at a loss for words when it comes to how I feel about Silksong. It's truly one of the greatest video games I've ever had the pleasure of experiencing, and that's in no small part to its vast and well-realised world with interconnected set pieces, great area and enemy variety, and for me most of all, varied, interesting and kick-ass boss fights. By far my favourite aspect of the original Hollow Knight, and honestly one of the best things carried over into this game. This list is going to be extremely difficult, and I should make it clear, I do not think that there is a single bad fight in this whole game. Some of them are obviously a bit weaker than the others, but we'll get into that. But we'll be ranking these guys based on their mechanics as a fight, difficulty, music, placement in the story, you name it. Anything that contributes to the energy of a boss fight will be considered, and of course, my personal enjoyment. Let's get into it. Is this even a boss? I'm serious. I know it has the boss card title in the bottom, but this just felt like a slightly more capable enemy. It has one attack, and its best trait, its design, I hardly get to see because it's teleporting away from me so often. It confuses me slightly because Verdania already has a great boss inside it already, so this inclusion wasn't really something I was aching for. I guess it's inoffensive enough, but I hardly have anything of note to say about it, whereas other bosses on this list have a bit more I can appreciate. Once again, I must ask if this even counts on the list. Some lists kind of include it, but Craggler just feels like a big enemy as opposed to a boss. It's not very significant and it has no accompanying music. The only edge this guy has over Palestag is that at least he is kind of tricky if you don't know what you're doing, and if you cross through here early game and you don't exactly have the comfortable means to take him out, it's at least satisfying to know you can kill it once you're more capable. Still, nothing I'm itching to replay. I think I missed something significant with this guy on my first playthrough, because the name Plasmified Zango implies there was a regular Zango that I just never encountered. As such, this fight, if you can call it that, doesn't hold much significance to me, and the lack of a theme or interesting attack patterns doesn't help. I will say, the transformation of Wormways in Act 3 is one of my favourite area enhancements in the entire game, and I think Zango contributes to how screwed up a lifeblood infection can be. It felt like coming across a zombie that was locked away and not meant to be found, which I think is neat. Regardless, Zango isn't ranking too high for me. Now for two of my favourite NPCs of this whole game, with a fight to themselves no less. After aiding you throughout the whole game, you finally get to cross blades. I missed this on my first playthrough, which was rather disappointing, so going back and gathering the footage allowed me to actually see this fight. And it's novel, but it's really nothing special. He has 3 extremely telegraphed attacks, so he doesn't pose much of a challenge for where he sits in the game. And I think he could have been made a bit speedier. I think that could have worked. It's a little bit too basic, but I can't lie, regardless of the challenge, it's always nice and charming to have a little spar with a close ally. So yeah, not too impressive, but I do enjoy the vibe. Really, the last of the fights I have a middling opinion on. Look, you gotta get through the stinkers before you can appreciate the good stuff. On to Voltvyrm themselves. Would you blame me if I ranked it this high because of its name? Like, it's incredibly fun to say. Aside from that, I think the Volt Nest is an interesting subsection of the Sands of Karak with a lot of alien influence, and I think Voltvyrm adds to that by being this strange entity that doesn't quite take shape and feels more like you're fighting the nest itself. Its attack powers are quite interesting, and I think the aesthetics really make this one hit for me than the others. Even still, there's simply more interesting fights out there. As the first boss in the game, I think Moorwing does an excellent job reintroducing the player to how boss encounters function, and I think she serves her role quite well. She serves as a good natural evolution from the enemies in Moss Grotto, and the knowledge she's just an infestation in the Hermit's basement that you helped clear out really adds a layer of humour that I admire. Of course, we have to talk about the God Home Vengefly King Part 2, a section in Weaveness Atla that asks you to put the skills you've learned up until that point to face Moorwing, but twice as much, which was a nice surprise that actually gave me some difficulty. So designing a fight that works both when you have nothing and when you've had a decent time to get accustomed with more tools is certainly admirable, and is why I've ranked it higher than the other bosses. As of writing, this is the last boss I've encountered, and I won't lie, it was just okay. This is completely something you can miss as an optional fight. I think it's neat that this guy exists as it feeds into the duty that the Karak soldiers served, and seeing this discoloured soldier left to watch the endless sands was a very fun thing to come across. That being said, there is hardly much build up to him, and his moveset in this fight is incredibly basic. I find this battle more tedious than anything, with most of the attacks getting blocked than going through, and without a lot of music or build up, the fight doesn't exactly carry it through for me either. With that said, it's incredibly neat to have a bonus fight at all with the far reaches of the kingdom, and the Watcher at the Edge is a fine example of rewarding player exploration. Gonna level with you. I'm a sucker for bosses that make me feel something, and Skull Tyrant doesn't really do that. Facing them in the Marrow, they are a bit underwhelming in terms of their placement and attack patterns, with not much to write home about. However, what really elevates Skull Tyrant for me is the second encounter. Seemingly randomly, the Skull Tyrant makes an attack on Bone Bottom, wreaking havoc and terrorizing the pilgrims you've made friends with. The sheer unexpectedness of this fight is what elevates Skull Tyrant above the other bosses, because whether you can beat it or not, there are casualties from its attack, leading to a heartwarming yet grimly humorous scene involving a pilgrim. I think it's this one event that really sets in why the journey of the pilgrims is such a treacherous one, and goes to show just how rough these guys have it. This guy may not be the most complex fight when you lay it out, but its place in this world and events that transpire around it to bump it up enough for me to rank it above the others. Located in the slab, the Broodmother is the foul leader of the flies, and this is where I feel like we're stepping into like actual boss territory. I think the build up to this fight, realizing this thing's been breeding inside a disgusting crack in the wall to be greeted by this horrid specimen, is pretty good. The arena itself is a good preamble to get you into gear before it shows itself. Many of its attacks see it throwing itself around the arena and creating its own spawn to fight you. The smaller arena really adds to the frantic atmosphere and asks you to consider your positioning quite a lot. There's a lot of hazardous attacks that you were conditioned to deal with beforehand with the slab's regular enemies, and Broodmother bring those together for a mechanically interesting fight, even if there isn't a lot of build-up or relevance to the character. I still had a good time fighting them, and the atmosphere of the slab and the first use of cut through in this list really help add to the intense and fun fight. Two raging beasts in the blasted steppes, this dynamic duo serves as a preamble to what to expect in the sands of Karak, and their twin attacks of burrowing through the earth make for a unique challenge against other enemies. Though on the easier end, I will never say no to a duo boss fight, especially one that has me keeping track of multiple moving targets at once. And I don't know if it's just me, but I find these guys, out of most bosses, the most satisfying to hit. And I think a lot of this boss's easier difficulty contributes to the fact that you only need to defeat one before the other cries at its partner's loss and flies away. A very valid crash out that works as a great tease for an upcoming encounter later on. For now, what can I say? I love these two cones and I wish I got to fight them more before, because I got these guys on my first attempt. I'm glad bosses like Gurr still exist in the late game of Silksong, because it adds a good bit of variety amongst the really high intense bosses of Act 3, so it's nice to have a boss which scales it back a little. The lead up to the fight is quite memorable, I'd say, with you encountering as many traps left along the path he trailed, which serves as a good warm up for the fight to come. The fight itself isn't exactly anything special, he just kind of hops around chucking these out, but it makes for a fun zone control boss that is a bit more accessible than the rest. Plus, I love his design, though for a Scar based enemy I was hoping for a bit more of a challenge. I will say though, the room you find after beating him is a great inclusion to really drive in how dangerous and brutal this guy is, hanging many enemies from across the game on a goddamn display. The fight is slightly underwhelming, but I do think his build up and aesthetics pull this guy a bit higher for me. The Savage Beastfly, I imagine, stands as one of the more polarizing bosses in the game. With his deceptively large and quick attacks as well as enemy summons, he leaves little room for error. Though I think a lot of this difficulty may stem from the fact it's possible to find this guy extremely early on, and so you're far less equipped to deal with the high precision this fight demands. That being said, once you get to grips with the fight, I find it has a pretty good rhythm to it, and I think the fight is just hectic enough to demand full focus, but not so much that it feels like you don't have any options. The only time I had any frustrations were with the smaller flying enemies, since I always had difficulty trying to hit them. Regardless, I enjoy both encounters of the Savage Beastfly, and I think for one of the more beastly creatures, this fight still stands strong as a mechanically satisfying fight to go up against. I like this girl's vibe. Look, I'm not going to stand here and tell you that Disgraced Chef Lugoli is one of the finest bosses in this game, but I will tell you that I find her extremely funny. I think her design is incredible, and setting this fight within a disgusting and absolutely disease-ridden kitchen helps set the theming apart from other bosses. I enjoy the small warm-up beforehand with her two sous chefs coming in before the main attraction herself. What I like about this fight is that she doesn't keep you waiting around too long, especially for a flying boss, which I typically find to be more frustrating to fight due to how they're designed. Her fight is very well paced, with the unique challenge of her balls of maggots to hinder your silk consumption, forcing some more interesting interactions with the boss. It's snappy, it's fun, and I think trying to rationalize that she used to be the head chef up in the Citadel is likely one of the funniest things that you can do as a lorehead. This thing is such an odd one to rank, because by normal standards, this thing isn't a character. It's a huge stick of wood. But I'm a sucker for bosses that provide something different, and I think the theming is what really carries this one over the edge. Gameplay-wise, I find it fun to balance keeping atop the lanterns whilst avoiding the wisps, and realising the drill was a fantastic counter to this guy made me feel like a genius. The last phase is also quite cool, if a bit on the simple side, but I am a sucker for any kind of Wickerman and cult iconography, and I think the uncanny, grand and haunting nature of this fight is what makes this one stick out in my mind. It's different, it's fun, and a good challenge in the heart of the wisp thicket. I do wish there were some hazard on on the bottom to force you to stay up top, though I don't know how much the player base would have appreciated a completely airborne challenge. To be completely honest, I think this one and the Savage Beastfly are fairly close, but I think this one edges out purely on the fact this is a follow-up to the prior Conchfly fight, with this one seeking revenge after you took the life of its partner. I think it adds some nice extra personality to a boss that otherwise wouldn't have much to work with. The fight itself is also significantly upgraded from the Great Conchflies, with an increased attack rate and more varied attacks. It really adds an extra layer of franticness to the fight the previous didn't, and the praise from the last time about the Conchfly feeling great to interact with still carries on to this one. The only detracting elements from this fight is the ricocheting drill attack, which more often than not does not reflect upon being hit, and it makes the battlefield more unpredictable in a less fun way, and the disgusting run back through the awkward platforming segments really take away something. That being said, the Raging Conchfly is a great part 2 to the follow-up of this Greek tragedy. These two are strange, but I really enjoy what they add to the Deep Docks. Once again, I'm a sucker for duo fights, and particularly duo fights with enemies that have separate movements that fill in each other's gaps. The fight feels so perfectly hazardous with the lava pouring down from the walls, and this guy wielding a magma-infused double-ended spear. A couple of enemies from around the Deep Docks make their final appearance, and it feels like one last line of defense to prevent you from infiltrating their workspace. I do like the detail of seeing Gron around the Deep Docks beforehand making their appearance in this fight hold some weight. And while I like the challenge they provide and the vibes of the fight, I do wish it posed a bit more of a challenge and could have stood to be a bit more overwhelming. Maybe with more attacks that properly comboed together instead of the two working independent of each other. Still, I really enjoyed these two and I love what they add to the Deep Docks. This one is likely higher than you would have bargained for, but despite some flaws, I'm rather fond of Groal the Great. I'm a huge fan of his design, and his attacks feed extremely well into the polluted and foul design of Bile Water as a whole, and the threat of the maggot-infested water helps keep you on the edge each time you dodge attacks, in fear you'll plunge into the drink. On top of that, one of the attacks Groal has contains one of the few uses of Soul from Hollow Knight, giving this guy a big link back to fights like the Soul Master. However, I don't think it's fair to give praise to this fight when there are absolutely some big detracting factors. Factors such as the run back being incredibly frustrating and long, including what is admittedly an arena containing many enemies that aren't fun to face. All this combined makes for a rather polarizing fight, but I had a good enough time facing Groal himself that it outweighs the struggle I had trying to get back to him, though I recognise that it can be frustrating heading into what's otherwise a fun fight with a multitude of elements that change the advantages you can go into the battle with. The Unravelled is strange. One of the few bosses I beat after completing the game, this frenzied collection of mad silk collates into something that I can't quite put a defined opinion on. For one, I do like how it uses one of the conductor's armors as its form, and I'm glad a place like Whiteward has a boss to call its own. It's just as confusing and weird as I hoped a boss here would be, and the blindness this boss can inflict to create uncertainty help make a boss with some good horror aspects. Though, while I have no issue with the style and visuals, I do think the attack patterns could have been a tad more complex, and that the Unravelled beast itself had some more moves to call its own, because all it does is dash forward and shoot some threads from its body. Also, I wish it leaned into its horror roots a little stronger than it did. That being said, the fight is still fun with a great and unique identity, even if I wish it leaned even farther into making something truly stand out. Airborne challenge, you say? Well, Nyleth heard and Nyleth thought floors were overrated. For a late game challenge, this boss feels strange, and I'm glad something this lateral was thrown at the player, even if I do find certain elements to be rather frustrating, such as the speed at which she zips from one side of the screen to the other being extremely hard to reposition and adjust to, and some attack combos can be cruel to face even with experience. However, there are tools to help mitigate the slow nature of the fight, and being a little more ballsy by learning to pogo off Nyleth helps to increase the dynamic and reactive nature of the fight. On top of that, Nyleth holds one of the most beautiful and tragic songs in the entire soundtrack, really telling of this monarch who just wanted to keep the heart of nature alive, having failed to do so in the current corrupt state of Farloom, making a boss that at some point feels sad to take down, and not many bosses are able to make me feel something. While it's not a very typical fight, I love what it adds to the variety of fights and the world as a whole. Right. Now we're getting into the good stuff. Pinstress is a really fun fight to encounter in Act 3, with a great energy that a lot of fights don't have. This one feels like a fun clash of ideals, with Hornet willing to prove that she won't allow the end of the world and will not take out Pinstress, and the other believing that this is their final act as a warrior she used to be. I overall find the Pinmasters to be quite interesting, and the 3 different lives they chose to live help add to the idea that Pinstress believes she lost some part of herself along the many years she's been hiding away, and the fight along Mount Fey of all places really adds to this atmosphere. Even with that, it's clear she's having a lot of fun during this fight, and her attacks and animations certainly reflect that. While I don't think she's the most satisfying boss to fight due to the fly mechanics making it difficult to consistently get hits in, I do adore how she uses the needle arts back against you, and the lore behind the masters beforehand helps add to the cool factor of this fight. The second Sentinel wasn't a character I came across for ages. Not until Act 3 did I stumble upon this absolute aura farmer of an automaton. Swarm protector against the enemies of the Citadel and enemy of you. This fight reminds me a great deal of Hive Knight from the first game, in that their attack patterns aren't terribly complex for where you fight them, but their visual flair and mechanics end you with a very clean and immersive fight. I love this character's internal struggle of not properly being able to discern their duty from their feelings, and taking place among their other hollow automatons adds a certain sadness to their purpose in this society. Despite that, this character's design and fighting style feel like a great match for Hornet, and I think a welcome twist against them is the fact that they are not destroyed by the end. They are eventually beaten back into realizing we don't pose a threat to the kingdom, and making a real friend out of this character makes this fight stick out to me more than some others. Plus, I will never turn down a fight with a character using the aesthetics of the Citadel's high halls. Second Sentinel rules. This was an incredibly nice fight, and a real novel inclusion after her side quest. Shakra is easily one of the most endearing characters of this entire game, and this reward of getting to challenge her in combat was one of my favourite surprises of the whole game. She is fast, nimble, and finally gets to use those chakram in action for one of the trickiest attacks to work around. Plus, I'm a huge fan of the sound design during this fight, as I find the clash of her blades incredibly satisfying. I always felt encouraged during this fight, even when I was playing just plain awful. As a footnote to Shakra as a character, this was a fun and interesting fight that felt like a great challenge to undertake with a reward that's honestly one of my favourites. Crawfather is a boss that forever eluded me. I refused to believe the Craw's Nest was anything but that one dreadful arena, and figured there had to be some kind of leader amongst them. Well, imagine my surprise in Act 3 when I get a parchment from a mysterious party asking me to return to East Greymore. Already an incredibly interesting prelude to the battle, and returning to the Craw's Nest only to be greeted by new variants of the enemies, and a secret Craw society beneath the nest was an incredible surprise, with probably one of my favourite uses of an arena and enemy inclusion before a boss. The Crawfather himself has a wicked design, and while his attacks aren't anything too special, I think the Craw enemies and the sound of the hefty groans really add a more frantic energy to the fight that most other side bosses don't have. I love the idea that the Craws are passing judgment onto you and exacting revenge on you for unleashing the Void, which is honestly so valid. And with my favourite usage of the song Cut Through, I think Crawfather and the Society stick in my mind as sitting near the top shelf of encounters in this game. The Clover Dancers are very interesting to analyse because there is a lot to get into between this fight and the previous fight it's based on, the Clockwork Dancers. Overall, I love the aesthetics of the fight. Verdania is a beautiful locale with some of the most gorgeous music in the game, and learning more of the prince's past home and unfortunate backstory with their prior lover really adds an extra layer of tragedy to this fight. Facing down the prince and the visage of the other prince felt like we're giving some kind of closure to a life that haunted the prince after his land fell to ruin, despite the other prince giving up their life for the protection of Verdania. The fight itself features some beautiful new music and a whirlwind attack that absolutely still throws me off, but I'd be lying if I said the gameplay of this one feels like a slight letdown, effectively rehashing the mechanics of the Clockwork Dancers without the gimmicks that came from that boss. Even still, it's a fun fight, and I think the context surrounding these characters and the thematic repurpose of these two more than makes up for them reusing elements from a previous fight. Despite a bit of missed potential, I still think as an optional quest, the Clover Dancers stand as an emotionally effective plot in Fargrim's history. Now this is a first boss, baby! The Bell Beast starts off as what can be seen as a wild creature defending its territory, and as an early fight, I think it shows Silksong's difficulty increase and more harsh design extremely well. This fight properly introduces the double massive damage you'll be experiencing throughout the entire game, and helps you get to grips with the combat mechanics a bit better than Moss Mother does, I think. The more compact arena forces you to properly react to the Bell Beast attacks without a lot of wiggle room, making this a lot more claustrophobic than most other fights. The Bell Beast track is a rather intense composition, and the battlefield being completely surrounded by bells adds a unique feel to the fight early on, since there's nothing visually like it until you reach Bellheart. Then, of course, we know the story after you complete the fight. Instead of disposing of this creature, the Bell Beast instead becomes your ally as the fast travel, using the Bellways to carry you around the world, and I think you realise by now that I love making friends out of previous enemies, and the Bell Beast is the first instance of that. Even though the fight itself is quite simple compared to others, I still think this fight serves as a fantastic early impression of the fights to come, and helps expand the world in an interesting and natural way. For that, the Bell Beast ranks this high. Now there are two very important angles to discuss when it comes to Shrine Guardian Seth. One is the fight itself, that I wasn't entirely sold on upon first playing, but looking at it now, the fight is incredibly interactive, forcing you to properly consider when you strike, because the window is deceptively small. I think my only thing is that some of the telegraphs are a little bit too similar, and I think the shield attacks are a little bit too fast and unreactive. Even still, I love how respectful of a fighter he is, making sure you want to challenge him before he goes insane on you, and not many characters grant you that courtesy. On his own, this fight works perfectly well, but learning this was a tribute to Seth Goldman, a young Hollow Knight fan who unfortunately died before the game's release, makes this fight feel so much more special. It's incredible that Team Cherry dedicated this game partly to him, and making him a recurring, friendly NPC after this battle really adds an extra layer to this character and this fight. I love Shrine Guardian Seth for how much more special he feels against the rest. Sister Splinter is yet another fight that demands your full focus when you get around to it. A boss that occupies the whole space on the ceiling, and I think mechanically as a fight, it's one of the strongest and most satisfying in the whole game. I think her animations are incredibly fun to look at, and the good telegraphing keeps this fight feeling both frantic and fair. Everything clicked with me on this fight, with the vines working as great hazards and a collection of enemies I actually think function well in tandem with the boss and don't just detract. Her theme is extremely plucky and ugly, helping add to the great atmosphere of the battle, and her design really makes you buy into the notion that this is a mutated plant life gone mad. She doesn't have a lot of relevance to much else going on, but I think she adds to the narrative that Shelwood has grown more disorderly and wild in recent years, and the notion that she could be related to whatever witch shenanigans are going on in that forest does add a little layer of intrigue as to what she truly is. While her involvement in the wider narrative doesn't add much to the fight, what she lacks in that category she more than makes up for with snappy gameplay that feels great to constantly challenge. Now comes a fight that I personally found hurt the most to fight. Garmond and Zaza are recurring NPCs throughout the game, standing as proud warriors that can even help in certain fights like the Moorwing, which I personally had. These guys were my personal favourite friendly characters in the whole game, so seeing these guys taking an active stance against the Void just endeared me to them even more than they already had. So when I realised Zaza sent out a distress wish to meet me in the Blasted Steppes, I had an unfortunate inclination as to what happened. Lost Garmond was one of the most gut-wrenching and shocking twists of the whole game, and it's not even close. It just hurt to see one of my favourite characters succumb to the effects of what we had unleashed, and this was one of the biggest things that truly set in how devastating the Void really is. Not a single boss in this game or the original Hollow Knight gave me such a wash of sadness once it was completed, and seeing Zaza sit beside her dying friend is still such a cruel and upsetting turn of events that I can't get off my mind. The fight itself is a sad display of the Void corruption, but nothing we aren't used to by this point in Act 3. So while this fight isn't exactly the most difficult one out there, I think the emotional damage this caused me completely carries this fight this high on the list without question. Yet another cruel twist of Act 3, the Bell Eater emerges from the Bellways if you try to call upon your familiar, and the harsh and animalistic response of this creature immediately set panic and dread into me, for fear of what happened to my goddamn baby. The Bell Eater is one of the best bosses of the creature variety. From its bright red face to the dark grey outer shell, this centipede-like beast is everything you'd expect out of something like Bell Beast upon first knowing about it. As the most likely first boss you will find in Act 3, this serves as a fantastic introduction to the shift this act provides, and the presentation of this fight is just top notch, with it using its own body to create the barrier of the arena and burrowing through the ground to summon bells to crush you, using both ends of its body to throw different tricky combos of attacks at you that felt interesting to find different counters to. Another fun vibe of this fight is the fact that you desperately want to kill this thing because of how strong your connection is to the Bell Beast at this point, and the implication that this thing could have eaten them is enough to make you see red. Of course, the Bell Beast lives and comes in to deal the final blow in this horrid thing with one of the most climactic and epic endings to a fight in this whole game. Seeing this boss get murked was incredibly satisfying, and the Bell Eater sits as an incredibly memorable and engaging encounter. The fallen leader of the Sands of Karak, Crust King Khann, is awesome. I think the visual of these solidified soldiers surrounding their leader really provided us good insight as to what these lands once provided to the kingdom, and when Act 3 rolled around, knowing we would encounter the king in his prime was an exciting prospect, and he certainly makes a good presentation of it by providing a tough but fair enemy gauntlet as you hear his battle cries atop the tower, with the visuals really giving you a good look as to what this land used to look like before falling, and it's beautiful with an oddly nautical theme we haven't properly seen in the game yet. As for the boss itself, I would disagree with the popular notion that it's a letdown after the tower climb, and I'd say it's a rather engaging and diverse challenge where Khann sends out wave after wave of coral spears to trap your movement, and in the late stage of the fight, there was a lot to keep track of while still feeling like a fair challenge. And the upbeat song to accompany him really adds a more bombastic energy to the fight that really pushes you on. With a combination of a fantastic build up to the fight and the fight itself being a fun and unique challenge, I can only give Crust King Khann my praises. From here we really have what was hardest to rank because every boss above here sits in S tier or higher, and I think a good boss to begin our top shelf of bosses with is the first Lace encounter in Deep Docks. This is our first boss to really give us some insight as to what's going on, and introducing Lace as a rival character to Hornet is done in an incredibly effective way by giving her a fast and fluid moveset that properly tests you with new abilities. Lace feels like she keeps the pressure on, and the risk of being slowly pushed to the edge of the map is a hazard that is kept throughout all her fights. It really feels like you're facing a character that's just as capable as Hornet, and her personality shines even in this first encounter. The way she talks down to Hornet and the way she laughs and flaunts her helped give this fight a distinct personality. It leaves a big impression on you, and I have to shout out the track Lace for being able to work as an epic chorus of strings while displaying Lace's flair for dramatics, and the lava-filled room of the Deep Docks helps to create this distinct vibe. Overall, there's little to criticize about this first fight. It's fast and challenging early on and gives us a good look at a character who will become rather important further on. Phantom is a fight that is pure aura. With one of my favourite build-ups to a fight, you must traverse through an elusive area known as the Mist to even stand a chance of finding Phantom. And what makes the build-up even more cool is the music that plays in the Mist itself, with the sound of organ. Then it all clicks when you enter the arena, and this strange character is playing a comically oversized organ that seems to be the origin of most of the steam inside the tunnels. It begs the question if Phantom wished to be found at all, and if this seclusion was self-imposed, because what is teased in the backstory is incredibly interesting. Another creation made wholly of silk, yet a seemingly discarded and incomplete vessel, fading and greying with age, which likely explains why they cling so dearly to their mask during the fight, as it likely gives them their only sense of identity. The boss fight itself is great, with this really agile creature zipping around the arena paired with the large exhaust pillars. The vocal delivery of the character is also fantastic. Though I do wish the fight had at least like one more attack to round out the moveset a bit, but I must talk about the ending to this fight, closing out with probably one of the most anime protagonist actions Hornet does in learning the parry move to use it back against Phantom. So cool and such a good theatrical boss that it's strangely easy to miss. Plus, the music in this fight might actually be diegetic because of the organ, which I think is neat. As the Act 1 closer, The Last Judge is a fantastic send-off to the first section of the game due to a multitude of aspects. First off, the energy of this fight is electric. Making the treacherous climb through the blasted steps to make your way up to the Citadel's gate really feels like a triumphant accomplishment with the other pilgrims who have crossed your path. Then, before you can savor anything, the Last Judge appears only to smite down those pilgrims and throw you headfirst into battle with his ball and chain wielding maniac. You really get a good sense of the judge's pompous and self-righteous personality, as though they really think they're doing a big service to the kingdom, or even perhaps there's a part of them that enjoys the purging of the helpless pilgrims. Whatever they are tall and imposing, with their core moveset asking you to properly respect the weapon they wield with a fun kit to work around. The second phase kicks things up a great deal, adding rounds of fire to the mix that ramp up the fight by a significant difficulty, building greater tension than most bosses. And with their armor completely combusting after the fight, there's just another sense of finality to this one. The music really livens up the tone of the fight, and I must say this boss's design of bronze armor really kicks ass. Basically, everything about this fight is great outside of one key element everybody likes to complain about: the run back. I won't stand here and tell you it wasn't annoying to run into the drill birds every time I wanted another attempt, because it definitely got to me after a while. But I also won't pretend that I didn't learn how to optimize the route to minimize the risk as much as possible, because it is doable in roughly 30 seconds once you get it consistent. I also think it's an appropriate setback for the end of Act 1, and the boss has so much sauce outside of that I'm more willing to overlook it. I think The Last Judge is awesome, which is why they still sit near the top of my list. Did I really put this funny bug this high? Yes, and there's nothing you can do about it. Of all the bosses without a distinct personality, Moorwing is hard carried by his extremely satisfying gameplay and the pure skill check they stand as, being what I would consider the final boss of early game. Taking place in Greymoor will obviously score them points, but I love how the boss stalks you through the city before you even counter them, prepping you for the fact that some creature does not want you here. Then once the fight begins, we have something incredibly dynamic and overwhelming. It took me a long while to get to grips with this one. This fight feels significantly more cruel than the others, and the double damage is even more punishing than ever. Though I still feel this fight has a level of dynamic interaction that other bosses simply don't have. You can play this fight really safe, keeping your distance and dodging outwards for a lot more security, punishing only when the time is right, or you can go full on aggression like no other if you're comfortable enough with attack patterns. Plus, if you're really struggling with it, Garmond and Zaza do show up to aid you as a real form of camaraderie that was just rarely present in the original Hollow Knight. I personally enjoy every attack in this bug's moveset, and that would be enough, but I must point out the way this fight interacts with the fleas. If you advance the caravan to Greymore before the fight, you can outright avoid this fight until it's advanced again. Then, later on, you see the Moorwing strapped to the back of one of the trailers and later cooked up in Fleetopia. If that's not justice for all the people who despise this fight, I don't know what is. Oh, and I have to mention that this is my favourite usage of the song Strive, and I basically attribute this song to Moorwing over other bosses it's used for. I think Moorwing is a wonderfully dynamic boss, both for its interactions in the fight and in the world as a whole. Yeah, this shocked me too. I thought Grandmother Silk would be higher, but lo and behold, she sits at 10th place. There was a lot to love about this fight, mainly the entire section inside the cradle helping build such a good atmosphere before the fight with a platforming challenge beforehand, seeing the colossal silk cocoon in the background, and it's just a fantastic visual element before you challenge yourself to the monarch at the top of the kingdom. And the introduction to this fight does not disappoint as we see this entity arise from the background, introducing us to the one who has been the source of the haunting and Farloom's misery, Grandmother Silk. Let me tell you, that title card definitely hits different this time around, and the visual look of this fight really carries that sense of finality. Her smooth, floating animations make her feel more alien than most other fights. The design looks unlike anything in the game beforehand, it's just perfect. She follows a similar design philosophy to the Radiance in that she has a wide base moveset with 2 moves usually occurring at the same time, and not knowing what combination you'll receive is what adds to the great element of challenge. Each attack is wonderfully done, with all of them feeling readable and exciting to dodge through without sacrificing the hectic and climactic sensation of the fight. Presentation is off the charts, especially on this attack if you get hit by it, while also being the only attack to do 3 massive damage to my knowledge. But that's only phase 1. With phase 2 coming in and speeding up the pace of the fight and adding falling debris to only limit the real estate you have to play around with, I find it insane it never feels like an unfair boss. And the music coming into a climactic finish with the strings and choir blaring the main melody of the game one last time. Then of course, this boss has 3 unique endings attributed to it, which obviously bumped it higher on the list, with the first ending being the awesome spectacle of Hornets taking her place, the Grub Baby binding itself to the Monarch, which is haunting, and of course the ensnaring ending which summons the Void. So many memorable things to this fight. My only downside is that I do think it could have stood to be a bit more challenging, considering that it is one of the final fights most people would go against. Regardless, Grandmother Silk is wild, with a great climactic energy as the final challenge this game provides. Come on, who doesn't love this guy? The grim thespian of the Citadel, Trobbio isn't all just show. This guy is also an incredibly fun battle that provides something new in the great roster of bosses. It goes without saying that the visual flair of this character is only matched by a few others, and the distinct vivid red in his design helps him stick out against other bosses, and the stage performance aspect really adds some good visual variety to the typical arenas. His character as well, which you would expect to be quite one note, is fairly fleshed out through his dialogue and notes, as someone who wishes to free Farloom through the power of theatre, and those seeking salvation should prove their worth on his stage, not caring for the casualties he is responsible for. With a unique music track putting the piano in centre focus, Trobbio is just as dramatic as he is fun to go against. I think his fight is wonderfully creative, using multitudes of fireworks, trapdoors, and bombs that help uphold this unique identity, and the animations combining both dance and fight are simply perfect. And it goes without saying that this guy has by far and away the best vocalizations of any character, thanks in no small part to Matthew Trobbiani, who the character was named after. Trobbio is a great fanatic fight with engaging attacks, flair, and enough challenge to land him this high on the list. Oh my god, there truly isn't anything else like it in the game. I've heard critiques the fight is too easy, but let me tell you, viewer, I couldn't give a rat's ass. For an early game fight, the 4th chorus fits perfectly into the world as something imposing and fun to fight against. Seeing this broken down machine in the background of the far fields immediately clued me into the fact that something was going to occur here, and the introduction to this battle is incredibly cinematic, with the 4th chorus rising out in the background with a roar, throwing you straight into what has to be one of the most exciting fights in the whole game. As it claws and swings, destroying platforms and dropping craters, I love how this boss takes advantage of its imposing stature and gameplay wise. I do like like how it forces you to use the Drifter's Cloak by stalling and keeping the airtime as the boss attacks. I do also have to talk about why this boss looks so different from everything else in the game, outside of the fact that it's just big and cool. The fourth course uses a different animation style from most other bosses. Instead of traditional hand-drawn, this boss uses tweened animations, which is why it looks so smooth compared to other characters with a set frame rate. It adds more unique reasons to enjoy this fight, and the visuals are certainly one of the biggest pluses. Finally, I love how there are two ways to finish the fight. One by continuing to fight the boss as you have been the whole time on a tighter platform, and another to activate the exploding magma above by floating up and crushing the big robot. It's yet another fantastic way to vary the fight by giving it a win condition that isn't just landing enough blows, though that's still possible if you think crushing it is too cheap. My only wish is that I wanted some of the arm attacks to overlap in the second phase to really force more movement and pattern recognition out of the player, but I will say that the style, lore, and experience of this fight all help to make what is one of the strongest impressions this game leaves on you, to really show how much larger this game is in comparison to anything in the original Hollow Knight. The fourth chorus is awesome, and that's why they're here. Trobbio is back, baby, and probably has the second best refight in the whole game. This guy immediately sucks you back into the ridiculous theatrics and somehow tops it over the last time with the purple revamp of the stage and Trobbio slowly rising up from the platform, the music going more maximalist than the last time, and the fact that the track for the boss has the choir consistently putting their heart and soul into singing Trobbio is really just the cherry on top. It's this kind of stuff though that makes the world feel so much more alive, since going into Act 3 you can see the stage as the new cosmetic to it, and actually seeing a character change their tune in such a meaningful way due to the void really makes it seem like our actions really makes an impact outside of just gameplay ramifications. All of that, and we haven't even talked about the fight itself, which is just a more hyper and fast-paced version of the regular Trobbio encounter. But at this stage in the game, I was itching for any way to redo certain fights, and it was a welcome surprise to get an invitation back to a stage for once again another really fun fight with one of my favourite tracks and styles to boot. Seeing Trobbio's turn to doom and gloom is just a delight, and while this section may not be too long, know that everything I said in the first Trobbio segment carries over to this fight and then some. From here on though, the order in which these guys are placed is purely for the sake of the list, but I cannot overstate enough how good these bosses in the game are, and that these final 6 could reasonably be placed in any order. Now this is the kind of boss I was hoping to come out of the slab. The first Sinner is one boss you seriously need to go out of your way to get, and this fight absolutely rewards you for your exploration. Chained away within a secret cell of the slab, this boss has the distinct look of a weaver with a cracked skull and wild movement. One of the most hectic and satisfying fights in the whole game, with so many attacks that keep you on your toes and asks for full concentration. Gameplay wise, this is one of the best boss fights I have ever had the pleasure of experiencing, and the character displayed through the fight is great too. In Weaver fashion, they fashion themselves a cloak the second they are freed, and the way they use silk in their own capacity really take advantage of what it seems the Weavers were capable of. Not to mention when they start using their own silk skills and even begin binding to heal themselves. That's when I knew this fight was something special. I also love all the particle effects and animations in this fight, each one adding so much flair while also staying readable and fun. There's not a whole lot more to say in terms of the actual fight because it's all just really solid, and it's absolutely one of the most pure fun fights in the whole game. I also really like the insight as to how the Weavers were created, with Grandmother Silk essentially granting higher power and sentience to certain bugs, and I like the idea that this character tried to incite some kind of regime against the Citadel or the Grandmother, causing their imprisonment as we see in the game. A whole lot of intrigue and a whole lot of cool aspects to this fight where I don't really have any critiques. The last of the 3 monarchs we need to talk about, all of the pain from the Hunter's March were worth it to have a duel against this sickle-wielding opera singer. This character is actually one you can encounter early on, assuming you make it through the Hunter's March, as a statue, and it drove me insane that you couldn't do anything about it. So come Act 3, I was so ready to finally understand what this character is all about, and something I really like about this queen as opposed to other monarchs we go after, she is still alive, just extremely aged and far past her prime, which is honestly a really upsetting sight. Going into her mind, I love how we get to hear her voice and performance before even facing her, with an arena that I don't mind doing beforehand because the preamble doesn't last long and builds up to the fight extremely well. Then, once the fight begins, we have yet another mechanically solid fight with one of the most memorable songs in the whole game. Diegetically making the character sing the song of her boss theme actively makes this fight feel more alive than a lot of other games in their entirety. I love her design both because of her bright red shell and because it's used to great effect as a focal point in the fight, and this battle truly is one of the biggest skill tests. I love how fluidly she moves across the battlefield with her blade attacks, and one of my favourite things to learn throughout all of my attempts was to understand the different telegraphs in her grounded moves. There was a perfect balance of keeping distance and getting in close, and the tension ramps up appropriately by the end to something that I can confidently call one of my favourite boss fights from any game ever. Like, this boss is that good that it made the heinous sections with the scars not too bad by the end. And now we reach the true final boss of the game. Lost Lace is an emotional and taxing ride that really asks you for everything. The whole sequence with the Abyss was one of the most wild sections of the whole game, and knowing we had to venture underneath the void to find both Lace and Grandmother Silk made for an incredibly cinematic and appropriately epic finale. To go over everything I can, I love the cutscene that plays beforehand along with the music, Last Dive being a musical beauty, really giving this moment the weight it deserves, and having the arena take place within the void, seeing Grandmother Silk strung up and ragged in the background just as a set piece, I mean, like, how much more climactic can you get? Getting into the fight itself, we have the third iteration of Lace's moveset, and despite the skeleton remaining the same, it feels like the most hyper-intense version of the fight, mostly down to the wider arena and the void-infused attacks, completely changing how you dodge certain moves. This fight really doesn't hold back in terms of throwing everything at you, and you'd want that for a final boss. I just love all of it, and it really feels like Lace's amped up rage to the highest degree, and slowly freeing her from the corruption is a great narrative for the fight. Adding to the heroic tragedy is the music itself, which is again another masterfully composed piece that really dragged me kicking and screaming into the moment, and hearing this each time I locked in. If I had any critiques for the later sections of this fight, it's that sometimes it can be a bit too difficult to spot Lace amongst all the attacks, especially since she blends in quite a lot. Still, the finale of the boss where we properly escape the void with the help of Grandmother Silk, effectively sacrificing herself for her daughter, is yet another incredibly impactful moment to round out what is a really special final boss. I love what this whole quest of Act 3 does for Hornet as well, making it so she won't hang around to watch another kingdom fall like Hollow Nest, and having Lace represent that hope despite her nihilism and rebellion was an excellent choice that really made it feel like this was the correct path for the game to end out on. There's a lot to love about this fight both mechanically and story-wise, so you might be a bit curious why a certain other fight ranks above it for me. The second Lace encounter is my personal favourite out of all the times you fight her in the game because it feels like a true test between equals and a fantastic clash of perspectives. I think this fight really lets Lace shine the most as her own character with the beautifully animated cutscene beforehand, and probably the most memorable arena out of every boss. Lace's fight here takes everything cool about her first encounter and makes something incredibly precise and thrilling. As the fight before Grandmother Silk, the fight feels perfect narratively and gameplay-wise, with the clashing worldview of Lace and Hornet really feeling at its full focus, and I love how much catharsis this battle provides since Lace has been taunting the player ever since their first encounter. This really feels like a dance, and an excellent one to master at that. The fight really gave me some trouble and had me stuck for a good while before I could beat her. But after completing the fight, we get some really insightful dialogue between these two characters, and the drop of knowledge that Lace is a being made purely of silk really adds so much to how she acts and views the world, devaluing her own life and constantly defying her mother, which in turn makes Hornet's words of wisdom afterwards really hit closer to home and adds some real human emotion to the core of this conflict that hasn't really been present through the rest of the game. Now, that's all good, but I don't think it justifies why I placed it this high above Lost Lace, which by all accounts should be the superior version of the fight. And I completely agree. I just personally prefer the vibes and plot surrounding the second encounter more than the third, and I don't think I need more justification than that. Lace is by far the most complex and interesting character in this whole game, and her fight appropriately reflects her role in the story, so I'm glad to be placing her encounters this high for being incredibly fun and challenging. We finally reached the top two, and I don't think it should be much of a surprise to see these guys up at the top of the list. These guys really provide a different level of storytelling in their fight without so much as a word. And what's crazy is that it works both in the fight and allegorically for the two princes of Fredania. I'm getting ahead of myself a bit though. The fight itself is certainly a standout in Act 2 itself, taking place within the Cogwork core. These two literally dance around in time to the music and telegraph their attacks in probably the most obvious way any of these bosses have done so far, so the first phase doesn't really take long to get into, so while it's not too difficult, the presentation and design of the dancers is great. But then it begins to speed up. double time and things start to get a bit more intense. And I love how the rhythm of the fight doesn't take away from the fact that it's a good cognitive challenge to keep track of the two directions they will travel in. And then we strike the third phase where the dancers end up out of sync with one another, and the electricity of this phase would be enough to put it at the top of this list. And that shouldn't be much of a surprise if you know my favourite boss in Hollow Knight is the Sisters of Battle. The fight would have been top notch for this stuff alone, but after defeating one of the dancers, the other is left alone in a single serenade. With no one else to dance with, it slows, the music becoming more somber, letting the music box take center focus. It made me feel like I did something horrible, and it really stuck with me as a boss that really did something unique with its premise. And this doesn't even get into the interesting lore bits. Realizing the design of the dancers is based on the look of the prince, and finding out later that the other Verdanian prince gave up his shell for these guards adds a good layer of tragedy and closure to having the prince taking back the shell of a broken automaton. This fight has so much to it, in and out of what's first given. The fight is one of the most memorable encounters of the whole game, and I would easily call this the best fight in Hollow Knight Silksong, but there is one that I would call my favourite that I have placed above this. Come on, dude, Widow had to be sitting at the top of this list. This boss has left the longest lasting impression on me from when I first came across it, and it is still a joy to refight and learn more about. The prelude to this fight begins the second you enter Belhart, with all the denizens strung up by Silk, and an immediate change in objective to figure out who is behind the Silken Curse once and for all. Then, after some traversal and working our way through the bell veins, we find our way into the lair of this lone bug, humming away and playing this mess of strings like a harp. Finding out that this character is not the source of the haunting, but a key player keeping things in check, and bowing to the whims of whoever really has control. Realizing this character was a weaver as well made their dialogue hit with a lot more venom and personal intent, even invoking Hornet's mother into the picture, helping add more personal stakes into the battle. Then, what succeeds is one of the most electric boss fights in any game I have ever played. Widow cries and screams, darting around the stage and orchestrating the strings to bring down obstacles and barriers that make for my favourite gimmick to master. Dodging and evading feels great, but it wouldn't mean much if we ourselves couldn't get in. And I think this boss does a great job of tempting you to get the most out of every attack window. This fight makes an incredible balance between the two, and makes for one of the most interactive fights in the whole game. The music as well adds so much, with the strings going nuts, and a haunting melody that services that battle, and the character extremely well. And if that wasn't enough, there is a phase 2 to this fight with a fake out death, where the music comes in even faster and stronger, and oh my god, it hits every single time. The ending of the fight 2 really solidifies my favour for this boss, as Hornet rips into Widow with all her strength, binding with her full might and making her defeat feel all the more impactful, freeing the people of Belhart and unravelling a great mystery in Act 1. That would be awesome in itself, but the lore of this boss takes it so much deeper, because this is a weaver without their mask. What are the implications of that? What does that do to a weaver, and what do they do to have that revoked? The pins in their back that deprive them of stringing their own silk, possibly implicating her as a specimen of Whiteward. Widow adds so much to the lore and story that feels completely natural without answering too many questions. Widow is by far and away my favourite boss in all of Hollow Knight Silksong, and I'm so glad to say that. This took me ages to write, purely because I had so much to say on everyone, and there's so few negative aspects of this game to discuss. I had a lot of thoughts, and I hope I made them interesting. If you want me to make some more lists on other games and things surrounding Silksong, then let me know and maybe get around to it. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a Hades 2 to complete, and actually it's taken me that long to record this video that I have now completed Hades 2.